Okay, this is Miss Terry, and we're going to hopefully conclude this review on Chapter 14. I just want to go back over what we talked about in Part 2. You need to know that figure 14.1, the pituitary is the master gland. You know that each hormone has a target, and understand figure 14.2. You need to know hormones are chemical messengers, and they're classified as either proteins or steroids. So proteins or steroids. With the exception of secretions from the adrenal cortex and the sex glands, all hormones are protein related. Please understand that sentence. With the exception of the adrenal cortex and the sex hormones, all hormones are protein or protein related. The adrenal cortex and the sex glands secrete steroids. That is a very important paragraph to know. Page 262. You know that hormones have a lock and key mechanism. Understand what that means. Understand what ACTH is. Understand oxytocin. Read the Sum It Up and the Do You Know. I think I've already told you that on page 264, as well as the anonym for the anterior pituitary gland hormones. Understand what the growth hormone is and what is somatropin. What is the somatrophic hormone? Understand the page 265, figure 14.4. Table 14.1 is in your blueprint, so we're talking about that now. The hormones involved in the thyroid and the pancreas. You need to know all of these. You need to know the anterior pituitary has the growth hormone, prolactin. We've talked about thyroid stimulating. We've talked about the ACTH and the gonadotropic hormones. That's all anterior pituitary. Posterior is ADH. We talked about that. Antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. The hormones of the thyroid and parathyroid we're going to talk about, but that's T3 and T4. And it's parathyroid, PTH, and calcitonin. Hormones of the adrenal gland are epinephrine, norepinephrine, and the steroids are aldosterone. Hormones of the pancreas, insulin and glucagon. Insulin lowers blood sugar, glucagon increases blood sugar. You must know that. Hormones of the pancreas have to do with diabetes. And you're going to see a lot of diabetes. You need to know where glucagon is secreted. It is secreted by the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans, and it increases blood glucose levels. Insulin lowers, and they're secreted by the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans. Other hormones are estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. We all know what those three are, thymosis, and melatonin. And going on is a repeat of what I've just said, the Sum It Up on page 268. And then we're going to get to thyroid. Thyroid gland, know where it is. It's the largest hormone gland, and that secretes hormones. It's follicular cells, and they secrete T3 and T4 into the colloidal for storage. So they're held there. You look down in here, and they're held here in the follicular stimulating hormone releases T3 and T4. You need to know that, into the blood. The parafollicular secrete calcitonin in the neck. Very important. T3 and T4, as we just talked about, they regulate metabolism. They permit proper functioning of all other hormones, so they regulate all other hormones. They promote normal maturation of the nervous system and normal growth and development. So you know people who have thyroid issues have problems with their metabolism. Calcitonin helps regulate calcium levels in the blood. T4 is also known as thyroxine. And so what happens if you have low secretion of thyroid hormones? Low secretion. So if they regulate metabolism, you're going to have a slow effect. Your heart rate's going to go down. You're not going to have any energy. You're going to gain weight. You're going to, how did I do that? You're going to have constipation. Everything slows down. If you have hypersecretion, what is that? It's speeding up. You will have a higher heart rate, diarrhea. You'll have a lot of energy. You'll have weight loss. But you could also have exophthalmia, and I'll talk about that in a minute. All thyroid hormone drugs will be a T3 or T4 mixture, so they'll contain both of those drugs. Hyperthyroidism we just talked about, and hyper. This is exophthalmia. It's bulging of the eyes, and it's also called Graves' disease, and you've got homework in that. So here is signs and symptoms of hyperthyroidism. You need to know those. I'm not going to go over them right now, but you need to go over those. You need to know those. And I believe that is all on your blueprint. Weight loss, muscle wasting, tremors, diarrhea, clubbing of your fingers. Remember we talked about that. Your hair's going to get real fine. Fiddle. Sorry. Okay, this is how the hypothalamus releases from the anterior pituitary, releases to the anterior pituitary. It releases the hormones. Remember, the hypothalamus is the big brain. Anterior is the other brain. And it releases T3 and T4 into the thyroid gland. And then you've got a loops. When the brain says, okay, I've had enough of one or the other, then it slows down. T3 and T4, iodine is essential for the synthesis. That means the development, the manufacturing of, the creating of T3 and T4, so you have to have iodine. Iodine deficiency, then if you don't have enough iodine, causes a goiter or enlargement of the thyroid gland. So you've heard of people who have goiters, and they have to have that operated on. And when you have an iodine deficiency, that interferes with that negative feedback loop that we were talking about, that, okay, I've had enough or I need more. And this is where the goiter will sit, and you see an enlargement of the gland. And this is a person who has one. Calcitonin is released, as we said, by the thyroid gland. It helps regulate blood levels of calcium and phosphate. I'll let you read the rest of that. There are 4 parathyroid. You've heard of parathyroid, and they lie along the posterior wall of the thyroid. So they're behind the thyroid gland. They're a most important regulator of calcium in our body. And they secrete a parathyroid hormone. Remember, that's what they are. And that elevates our blood calcium level. And this is an example. So if there's low blood, then that will stimulate the release from the parathyroid glands, and it will go into the blood, and more calcium will be produced. I'll let you read that. If you have a blood calcium imbalance, then it affects your bones and your kidney. Hyposecretion of calcium, it causes hypocalcemic tetany. and that causes spasms of the nerves there in your hand. It's called tetany, and you'll see people start having spasms if they don't have enough calcium. And a phrase, bone stones, moans, groans, that means your calcium is messed up. The adrenal glands sit here. They're located above the kidneys, and there's the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex. You need to know that. The adrenal medulla is the inner part, and the cortex is the outer part. The medulla secretes catecholamines, and the outer secretes steroids. Remember, we talked about that earlier. The extension of the sympathetic nervous system is in the adrenal medulla, and it's the fight or flight response. You've heard about that. When you get scared, what happens? Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, and your body starts immobilizing for emergencies. If you were almost in a car wreck, but you stopped in time, then you are going to have all these sympathetic nervous system feelings. You're going to start sweating, your heart rate's going to go up, you're going to start shaking, you're going to, maybe you need to go to the bathroom, whatever, but that's the adrenal medulla. That's that fight or flight. And then the catecholamines release epinephrine and norepinephrine, and they're secreted during stress. And that's referred to on page 271 when it talks about adrenal glands. So the adrenal cortex secretes steroids, as we've said now 3 times, sugar, salt, and sex. Glucocorticoids are cortisol, which is the most important one of them. Mineral corticoids are aldosterone, and testosterone of the sex are the most important. And it's the same loop action. That's it. Salt, sugar, sex is an easy way to remember the 3 classes of steroids from the adrenal cortex. In a general way, the classification reflects these steroids. So gluco, that's sugar, glucocorticoids, mineral corticoids, that's salt, and of course testosterone is the sex hormone. Glucocorticoids, okay, they affect carbohydrates. Very important for you to know. They convert amino acids into glucose. So once they're secreted, then the body starts making glucose. And that helps maintain blood glucose levels between meals. It affects the protein and fat metabolism, burning both substances as fuel. So your glucose gives us fuel. And cortisol is the hormone. Mineral corticoids, the chief mineral one is aldosterone. It plays an important role, very important role, in regulation of blood volume, blood pressure, and electrolytes. And you will hear about that in pharmacy. The primary target is the kidney. It stimulates the kidney's reabsorption of salt and water and the loss or excretion of potassium, which keeps our body in balance with minerals. Abnormal secretion is hypo. We've talked about that. Hyper is too high. Addison disease and acute adrenal cortical insufficiency are hyposecretion. Hyper is Cushing syndrome. Cushing syndrome is when you have too much. It causes hypertension, central obesity right in your tummy, easy bruising, osteoporosis, gum disease, and you have to have treatment for Cushing syndrome. And this is what it looks like. And the face gets swollen, puffiness around the eyes, etc. The pancreas is across the upper abdomen. Remember, the adrenals sit on top of the kidneys. This is now in the upper abdomen is your pancreas. The islets of Langerhans are there, and they secrete the hormones glucagon and insulin, which we already talked about. The pancreas, in my opinion, is one of the most important organs in the body. I guess it's not the most important, but you really can't survive with hardly without a pancreas. You hear people with pancreatic cancer nowadays, and it just messes up all kinds. So the pancreas secretes insulin, follow this, through the beta cells, and they lower blood glucose. When your blood glucose goes down, the pancreas will secrete glucagon, and that goes through the liver, and it elevates the blood glucose. So it keeps you in balance. It's like a teeter-totter. It keeps you in balance. Low blood glucose, and when that happens, you get glucagon. If your blood sugar gets too high, your pancreas will secrete insulin. And there's a description in the book about the pig. I'll let you find that. And I also want you to read page 273, Why Miss Cushing Has a Moon Face, Buffalo Hump, and Facial Hair. You need to know that. And PIG stands for pancreas, insulin, and glucagon, and you need to know all of that on the next page, 274. You're going to have test questions. You need to know over on page 276, Ramp It Up. That's a very good description of diabetes mellitus. And diabetes mellitus is a melting down of the flesh and limbs into urine. Hyperglycemia means excess glucose in the blood, and that's why people get diabetes. Glucosuria or glycosuria means glucose in the urine. That's why they do like a dipstick or a urinalysis. Polyuria means you're voiding a lot. And whenever the kidneys excrete a lot of glucose, then they also must excrete a lot of water. And therefore, people get polyuria, which means they are thirsty and they've just been secreting a lot of water and sugar out of their body. Polydipsia means you're really thirsty, and that is caused because you're voiding all that water and sugar. Polyphagia means excessive eating, and acidosis, you need to know that, an excess of hydrogen in the blood causes acidosis. That was on your previous test. And when incomplete breakdown of fatty acids produces strong hydrogen, it's called ketoacids, and this process is called a condition called diabetic ketoacidosis. And you need to understand that ketoacidosis is severe, probably will be on your test. You will see patients come into the ER with it. They have a fruity tone to their breath. You can definitely tell it. And they can die. And so when diabetics come in and their blood sugar is off the chart, they'll be into, more than likely they'll be in diabetic ketoacidosis. They are somnolent and non-responsive and literally can die. And we've talked about that. Insulin and normal metabolism. Carbohydrates increase the transport. So carbs help move glucose into the cell. They use glucose as fuel. Okay? So you want your glucose to be in the cells, not in the blood. You want your glucose to be in the cells. And storage of excess glucose becomes glycogen. Protein is stimulation of protein synthesis, and fat, stimulation of fatty acids. Insulin fosters the cellular use of glucose for fuel. So the glucose is sitting in the cell, and the insulin then causes that glucose to be used as fuel for our bodies. Deficiency of insulin is diabetes, and it very, very serious, has devastating effects. You do not want that. You can get hyperglycemia, which is excess glucose in the blood, and we've talked about all these other ones. Glucagon, that's the pancreatic hormone secreted by the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans. And their primary action, as we've talked about, is to increase blood glucose. The other glands, gonads, thymus, and pineal glands. I'll let you read about that. Other hormones, prostaglandins, and organ-specific. Adipose tissue, weight issues, they secrete cytokinins and cause problems with the heart, blood vessels, diabetes, cancer, and joint disease. That was a rapid of the last. We have just a few minutes left. I want you to study this information. I want you to understand diabetes insipidus. I'm looking at your blueprint. We talked about hormones secreted by the adrenal gland. We talked about the functions of the pancreas. We talked about growth hormones, insulin, the pineal gland. It sets your biological rhythms. You need to know what hypoglycemia is. You need to know what happens if you don't have enough iodine or you have too much. We talked about ketoacidosis. When a patient comes into the ER with ketoacidosis, what happens with adipose tissue? What hormone is that? You need to understand Cushing's syndrome, signs and symptoms of Cushing's syndrome. That was the picture of the lady. Has the moon face and puffy eyelids, that sort of thing. You need to know what PIG is, know what happens in the anterior pituitary. I think that's it. So I hope this helps you get a little bit more organized as far as your study goes. I want you to be successful in this course, and let me know if I can help you. Thank you.